Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about sort of the work I do at Nottingham. So as was mentioned, my work sort of spins around utilizing sensors and non-sensor information and developing machine learning algorithms and use of AI across the field of health, welfare, production, as well as on resistance as well. So if I could make this work. So what I do at Nottingham, I lead a ruminant population health group. So ruminant population health is one of the key strategic research areas at the vet school at Nottingham. And precision livestock and welfare actually is a key theme. And one of the reasons, so we have a very strong background in health and welfare. And I think with the 90 million investment in transforming food production industry strategy fund, that kind of really fits in, and that's where quite a lot of our funding has come through. We are also Center of Dairy Science Innovation at Nottingham, which is a 6 million investment into state-of-the-art dairy facility at Nottingham. So if you're interested, you're very welcome to come and visit. We have a wide range of collaborations sort of with industry and farmers and vet networks, where we try to not only study the health and welfare, but also try and see translation of that on farm. Okay, so what I'd like to cover in sort of 20 minutes or so, I'll talk about the challenges that are facing livestock production. I think some of that has been covered, but I'll sort of maybe briefly mention those. And I'll then talk about what are the opportunities or push factors that are really leading to precision livestock farming. Then I talk about my research, sort of examples of innovation, but then the key question is, okay, we have a technology, but what about adoption? So one area of my research is also around decision making, where I collaborate with various social scientists and use a range of methods to see how we can implement things. And then thoughts, some questions. Okay, so if we look at how the global food demand is changing, so global population will increase sort of by 40% by 2050, and there will be around 13% increase in per capita meat demand. And I think that's due to the increasing purchasing power. And a lot of that also will come from Asia and Africa, where people will start to consume more meat. In terms of dairy, sort of similar trends, we know what's happening is we have the herd sizes, sort of the number of farms are reducing and the herd size are increasing. So what the challenge we are faced with is we are asked to produce food with limited resources. And if you look at sort of the new strategy with zero net emissions, that's quite a big challenge for us, given livestock are the key, playing a key role in greenhouse gas emissions. Then thinking about more not only from the limited resource or production point of view, but if we look at other key societal challenges that we are facing, they are quite linked to animal health and in a way, One Health. So we have huge pressure with regards to antimicrobial usage and antimicrobial resistance. And if we look at sort of the statistics of that, 60% of existing human infectious diseases are zoonotic. So these challenges also pose a role in a way how we farm and how we produce food. Okay, now if we just think about how we monitor livestock health and welfare. So I don't know how many of you are sort of farm vets, but I'm trying to sort of more pose this question in a livestock sector. So a lot of times it's quite reliant on visual observation. And then in terms of we look at tests, we have, again, the problem with gold standard. And the data that we know collected on farm is intermittent, or there is sometimes lack of that data. The behavioral sign, if we think of, are the early indicator of a disease. So from an automation point of view, or from precision livestock farming point of view, if we could pick those, that would be a really key in early prediction of disease. Then how we assess welfare. So most of the measures are to some extent subjective, and precision livestock could play a key role in that area too. As an epidemiologist, I sometimes think, okay, what you do is you study disease in population. And how you study disease in population, you make sense of what data is recorded, you know, your cases, and you look at other risk factors. Now the question is, What about, because that data is only recorded intermittently, what about that bias in the test? What about the validity of that data? Because if we are only recording cases, or those cases are recorded not in a very controlled manner, the associations we are making could be very biased. And then the question is, do we really predict and prevent on farms? A lot of research I did in the past was quite related to farm-vet relationship. The example of that is only one-third, on one-third of farms, the vet has a regular contact, for example, on the sheep sector. And they're only sort of there for emergency. So are we really doing the predict and prevent model? Okay, so precision livestock farming, this term was sort of being used for a decade now. So what it really says is it's management of livestock, and the key point is continuous and automated real-time monitoring. And then you have different parameters that could be production, health, or welfare. I'll come back to why continuous is important later on, and you will appreciate that the continuous part is quite important in this definition. And this then also gives us a great opportunity to use various machine learning tools, AI, and different platforms where we can then start to make more sense of that data. So what have been the opportunities or the push factors? I think it's what said in the morning. So the cost of the sensors have gone down. There has been a huge technological innovations in terms of not only the sensors, variable, non-variable technology, we heard about Oxford Nanopore stuff, but also computational power. So these concepts, what we are using, are not new, they have been there, but now only we are able to use them. And you can see sort of the connected cow was talked about this morning. So it's sort of, you can look at the activity, but you can look at various different things about the cow. Not only the location, who the cow is interacting with, you can look at mastitis, you can look at rumen pH with the bolus sensor. So there are a lot of things we can now measure. So the promises, so I am going to first start with the promises, and I'm going to give you a bit of reality as well from the research. So the promises are, of course, with automation, we will have an efficient use of a resource. And that's where precision feeding or precision grazing happens. So if with various sensors we can take what the grassland utilization is, we can then also look at animal behavior, how they are grazing, and then we can move sort of with all the concept of virtual fencing or using the pasture in a more optimized way. And that's been happening. Diagnosis, where we can use these sensors to predict the disease early, to inform us on animal health and welfare with more objective measures. And I think I will cover a lot of that in sort of my examples. Prevention, again, if we know how continuously monitor a system, we are also able to then inform on the management, for example, stocking densities, if they are playing part in the health and welfare domain. Workload, of course, automation helps, and with shortage on labor, that's another very key point. Certification, as a consumer, it's very important. We want to know where the food comes, and with the whole blockchain concept, that's happening. We are also doing something in terms of where we know that abattoir data is not really used and gets to the farmer. So we are really looking at different parts of the supply chain and how we can make that process much better. Phenotyping, I think one problem with genome analysis is sort of having the phenotypes. And I think with all these sensors, now we are able to even think of more robust phenotypes that we can then link to the genotype and look for example, disease resistance. For me, one other part I think it does, as I said, the lack of contact between farmer and vet. This was a study we did ages ago where we went out, looked at sheep farms, and we asked the question, how do you think vet could add value? And then we asked the same question to the vet saying, how do you think you could add value? What was interesting, and I was talking about that earlier, so it was interesting, so farmers said, well, our farm is very unique and complex, but they also said, well, how can vet add a value because there is no data? And vet said, how can we add value because there is no data? So the data part was quite crucial because if there is no data, things may appear much more complex and unique than they really are. So one key point with that is that would strengthen the relationships. Okay, so let's talk about sort of the research. So start with some examples. My background's been working on lameness in sheep, and I have worked on it over 10 years. So my PhD was on lameness in sheep, and in the PhD we identified best practice, which had a real impact, and we looked at, and that best practice was simple, which relies on early detection and treatment. When I moved to Nottingham, and sort of one of the things, thinking about it, sheep being prey animals and talking to farmers, saying which sheep is lame, oh, that's probably the middle one, and thinking about how can we automatically detect lame sheep, and are there any tools? Because whosoever I believe have you seen a lame sheep? How many of you have seen a lame sheep? Okay, quite a few. So for those who haven't, one peculiar thing about a lame sheep is this head nod. So they have this head nod as they are walking. And I was sort of thinking, okay, we could really pick that up with a sensor. Okay, so this was a project I had to pitch to Intel and have them involved and get excited about. So this was a project funded by Innovate with Intel as partners and HPE and the funding from BBSRC. And the concept we used that was machine learning, edge computing, and LoRa. So I'll talk about what these technologies were doing in this. We published some of it already. So when we started looking at it, what are the technical challenges? So how do we automatically detect it? How can be the solution that could be relevant for extensive environments? So we cannot make the sheep charge the sensor, so how shall we work it out? Battery life was a big issue. How often we sample the signal to detect these different behaviors? How we process the data, transmission, what algorithms are best, and where should we position? So we tried ear and color. So this was really starting from the scratch. And I thoroughly enjoyed it because I think I learned a lot about engineering in the project. So the concept was very simple. We collect the data, we pre-process it, we develop a machine learning algorithm, we then implement on the chip, and I will talk about why that is important. We validate it, and if we need further testing, we do it. So the innovation that we used in this is something called pattern matching engine. So what is a PME? So the challenge we were faced was that the most of the energy transmission and where you lose battery is by transmitting your data to the cloud. So we wanted to make that part efficient. And we wanted to see whether that would help us in extending that battery life. With the PME, what it does is we develop the algorithm and we implement onto the hardware. And then when it sees the new data, it says, oh, that's standing, oh, that's a lame sheep. And then the packet size it transmits is very smaller. So that was sort of the concept, and that's what we implemented. Well, as there were a lot of challenges, so we had to match our signal data from the accelerometer to what the sheep was doing to build the algorithms. So the only way we could do that was we had to paint different colors to identify the sheep, because at that point there was no other way. So what we did, we used the sensor data. So this is like what you would see here. And we used sort of a machine learning algorithm. Basically, we just labeled this signal and saying, OK, this is walking. And actually, this is standing, and that was lying. And then we build our algorithm to classify these things. And then we said, OK, once it knows what behavior it's doing, let's find out if a sheep is lame or not lame. Original hypothesis was, actually, I can only detect lame sheep when they are walking. So that's why I had to classify them as standing, walking, lying. And it would be interesting to know what the sheep do all the time. So that was the other part. What was very interesting and not expected was actually the algorithm we used was able to classify lame sheep even within standing and lying, which is not visible to the human eye. So these are basically just the predictions, and these are different algorithms. And you could see on that we were able to sort of classify lameness with success. And our algorithms classify every 7 seconds, although we don't need to classify every 7 seconds. If you're interested, we are showcasing our sensor at New Scientist Live in Excel Arena. Okay, now, what I just talked about is only one sensor. But diseases are complex, so are animals. So one sensor sometimes doesn't give you enough information. So what about multi-sensor data fusion and IoT? So here we are pushing, again, with industry partners to go to these concepts, especially on calf and young stock health and welfare. So we know pneumonia and diarrhea, big problems, mortality, and there are no really real sensors. The majority of the market is sort of about adult cow. So young stocks market is sort of really, there are no sensors. So, and again, in the morning, it was mentioned data exists in silos. So our aim is how we can generate the data from different sensors, which is basically, it's not really a farm, we just took this. So we have environmental sensors, we have the bolus sensors where we get temperature, we have the weighing platform, and what we call is a communication hub. So what we are also trying is pool the data onto a device so that it's easier for the farmer. So it's not that you have to go log into this system to see the bolus data and this system to see the weight data. That's kind of the idea. If I could move that. Okay, so then the question is, can we really use temperature and activity and weight to predict disease? If you look at the figure on the sort of the left-hand side, sort of here, these are basically over 2 years data from the cow, their temperature, and the drops you are seeing is because they drink water. So that's why kind of you have a lot of outliers. But actually, what is very interesting is that different cows have different baseline temperature without any ailment. So any algorithm that will use a simple threshold is not going to work. So we developed methods where we can use individual cow baseline to predict the drinking behavior, actually, in this case. This is about calving. So here we can see the temperature drop. This is basically, we are trying to predict how the temperature changes with the environmental temperature. So you can see this is our prediction. So we have much more error sort of around the summer months and the temperature is going high. So this is basically the algorithm picking up the drinking events. And it does pretty good. You know, both not only sensitivity, positive predictive value, all the kind of major metrics are very good. One of the things we were interested in calving, and for the moment in industry, we can only by very good evidence say predict calving for up to a day. In our algorithm, we can now do it for up before 5 days. And I think that's use of various different, not only one metric, that's temperature, we are using temperature and activity. And we are using drinking information as well. Okay, just to say that we are using, we've been funded by Dutch industry CRV, which has got genetic information to do the same thing for lameness. So we have 10,000 farms for 5 years, and that is real big data. So that's going to be interesting. So we just started on that. Just when we think about algorithms, I think I would also like us to think about what about lifelong learning, this concept. Once you have an algorithm, it is static. How do we make the algorithm learn all the time? So generally, when we validate, so we did some validation and we say, actually, the discrepancy in the performance was very variable over farms. So we came up with a method where we do both online and offline learning. And I think that's very innovative. So that's just published. Technology giving novel insight. So this is, I call, secret life of sheep. So you know, the whole behavior thing actually came very useful. Now the question is, we always think of flocks. We don't think of individuals. So we think of group of animal. And we think about the variability as noise. But actually, it's not. Because if you look at non-lame and lame sheep and look at duration of hours they were grazing, it's very variable. I can't use just the grazing data one time to say that actually the sheep is lame, she's grazing low, so that's indicator. And I think this moves us to concept of inter-individual variation, plasticity, what role environment. So this is an exciting field in terms of insights. Okay, then here we are really pushing boundaries. Positive welfare. So this is a new project we just started. So basically putting a lot of sensing onto the farm. So we are linking health, behavior, social networks, physiology, pathogens, immune function. So the question we are asking is, what is the inter and intra-individual behavior? How do the calves respond to different stress? And is individual personality, sociability linked to predisposition? So we are using thermal cameras, we are using location of the calf, and taking various samples. The whole aim would be also to look for positive measures of welfare, like play behavior, which has shown to be very important in sort of overall well-being. So we have developed an algorithm that can detect a play behavior. Okay, this is sort of a project we just started. My colleague Tanya is leading that. This is on antimicrobial resistance, and this is with China. I think it was talked before, sometimes we need to look at more of a system approach in how we think about antimicrobial resistance. The key point, the main thing to take from this project is what we are doing is we are taking samples from various parts, feed, humans, environment, animals, and we are using traditional method of bioinformatics, which just only look at comparing it to known databases, but also using machine learning and AI to then look for resistance and biomarkers. So that just started. Okay, finally, adoption. So I think the questions are, what are farmer views and who owns the data and data security, all these aspects. So this is a model we produce in terms of adoption of EID technology. And the characteristic of whether the IT knowledge and all of that is important, but there are a lot of other aspects, trust in technology, and whether farmers think that there is perception of losing their skill, and that's also important. So I'm going to go and skip all these kind of slides to go into my final slide. Maybe just mention that farmers can see the value of technology. So we don't need to teach that technology could be useful. What we need to do is think about what other threats they are feeling and demonstrate the value. And I think most of the technology on farms is not validated. So that's an important point we need to consider. Okay, so the first point is there is a lot of information, and sometimes it's not usable. The whole systems that we are using are focused on alert. I think it was mentioned in the morning, what do we do with that information is the key. And as we develop these methods, the main point would be what kind of treatments are suitable for that early detection. For example, lameness in cow, for anything. Data still in silos. There is some effort towards making that possible, that it could be joined, but we are still in very preliminary stages. We need more interconnected systems. I mean, the basic technology EID adoption is very low. So here sensors are going to be down the line further away. So we need to really think how we make that adoption part better. And then there are other societal and public concerns about intensification. For example, moral concerns about gene editing. And with gene editing, this CRISPR technology, we can now, with the PRRS virus, we can have a pig that is resistant to PRRS, but what about the public concern? Great. I'd just like to thank my group and various collaborators. Thank you.